Hey there, my name is Kelli Needham, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator in Brighton, Colorado. And I welcome you to my YouTube channel, I Create with Color. Today I want to share with you a technique that I had fun kind of finding by accident. I was playing around with some of our decorative masks or stencils, and I came up with the idea to try this with Versamark and the pigment sprinkles, which I'll show you here in a second, and it didn't really work the way that I wanted it to, so I started playing around with the pigment sprinkles and water and ended up coming up with this really cool background technique here that uses our pigment sprinkles and a stencil. So let me move these out of the way and I'll show you the supplies that I'm using for this project, and then we'll jump right into the technique itself. So my card measurements are over here, but they will also be in the description at the end of the video so that you guys can go back and look at those again. But what I'm going to start with is a piece of Poppy Parade cardstock that is cut at 8.5 by 5.5 and scored at 4 1/4. I have a piece of Early Espresso that is 5 1/4 by 2 3/8. I also have a piece that is already done of the watercolored background, which I'm going to teach you how to make, but that is cut at 5.5 by, the watercolor paper is cut at 5.5 by 4 1/4 when we do the technique, and then it's cut down to fit the card at 5 1/8 by 2 inches. And this little gold strip here is also 5 1/8 by 1/4 inch. And then the other pieces that you might need for this is a scrap of Whisper White cardstock, a scrap of Old Olive, and a scrap of our gold foil paper. And then a small scrap that is about 3 inches by 3 inches of Early Espresso and Whisper White to die cut out those circles. So the other supplies that we're going to use today for this, the stamp sets that I'm using, are Pop of Petals. We're going to be using this flower here, the little water or looks like brush stroke type leaves, and this little sprig of berries. And the other stamp set I'm using, which I pulled the Wishing You a Lovely Day sentiment from, is Forever Lovely. With those, I'm going to be using the basic Pattern Decorative Masks, and those are, you can find those in the holiday catalog, I believe. I'm also going to be using our layering circles framelits. We don't call them framelits anymore, we just call them dies. But I will be using this size regular circle and this size scallop circle, and those are like the second one down from the biggest. So this would be the largest here. And we're going with the next size down in those. I will also be using our pigment sprinkles, which are watercolor crystals. They are pure watercolor pigment in a powder form, and they come in that cute little box, and the colors that come in it are Gorgeous Grape, Bermuda Bay, Mango Melody, Daffodil Delight, Granny Apple Green, and Melon Mambo. So those are the 6 colors that come in that pigment sprinkle set. The ones that we're going to be using today are going to be the Mango Melody, the Granny Apple Green, and the Melon Mambo. So I'm going to move these out of the way here. And then there's a few ink pads that I'm going to be using as well. Garden Green, Mango Melody, and Early Espresso. You're also going to need some type of a spray bottle. This is one that I found in the travel section at our local store. I'm going to be using blender pens to show you how I do a little bit of a watercoloring look after I've stamped my images. I am going to be using one of these spritzers from the Stampin' Up, only mine has a green lid and it says hand sanitizer on it, because this one I have been using forever before we got the other spritzers, and it has the stuff already in it and I didn't want to swap it out. So, and last but not least, we are also going to be using a product that Stampin' Up does not carry, and it happens to be what they call Pixie Spray. It is a repositionable adhesive that you can spray on the back of stencils, which helps you be able to take them on and off easily. They stick really well, but it does not leave a residue on your paper. And I know Stampin' Up doesn't carry it, but for this particular technique, it's going to be really crucial. I don't know how well other spray adhesives will work for this because I have not tried it. So I really just like this one, and I know that it works really well. So that's what we're going to get started with. And before I do that, I want to show you our decorative masks. They come in a pack of 4. Sorry, I didn't get these out ahead of time, but I wanted to show them to you because they're all really pretty. Alright, so this one here is more of a brocade type design. Then you have the polka dots. You have trees. And then you also have the leaf one, which we're going to be using in the video, which is this one right here. So it gives you an idea of what the designs are that come in that basic Pattern Decorative Masks pack. So bear with me for a second. I need to bring in one of my Stampin' Up boxes that our products come in, because when you use these pigment sprinkles, they are very, very messy and they get all over the place, and I want to keep my counter and my work surface fairly clean here. So bring in this box, which I have layered paper towels in so that I can do all of this technique and hopefully keep the mess to a minimum. So I'm going to lay my stencil down inside of this box, and I'm going to use the Pixie Spray to cover the back of my stencil. And you want to be pretty generous with this so that you make sure that it sticks really well to your watercolor paper. The watercolor paper has a texture to it, and the Pixie Spray doesn't like to stick if you use too light of a I guess spray, if you will. So I'm going to turn this over and stick this down. And it may go off camera for a second here. I really want to make sure that I stick that down good so that that stencil adheres to my watercolor paper really well. Okay, I think that'll do. And then I'm going to move this back over where you guys can see it. Alright, now we're ready to work with this. So, using that water spritzer, or water bottle that I'm going to use to spritz on here, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I get my paper nice and wet before I drop these sprinkles on there, because I really want them to start spreading as soon as they hit that water. So we'll mist this down really good. My spray bottle doesn't seem to want to spray very well. Alright, now that I have that spritzed with water, I'm going to take my Melon Mambo, and I like to just kind of tap on the side of the bottle of mine so that they don't come out a whole lot at one time. And I'm just going to sprinkle the watercolor sprinkle, or the, sprinkles, pigment sprinkles all over the surface of my stencil. And I'm going to do the same thing with the next two colors, the whatever color this is, Mango Melody. Just trying to get a little bit, here and there so that we get kind of a good variety of color. This one doesn't want to seem to come out quite so well. Alright, sorry for my hands in the way there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the Granny Apple Green. Trying to kind of cover some of the open spaces where there wasn't any pigment sprinkles from the other two colors. You can see it kind of come out there. Okay, so I think that's going to be good. Now what I want to do is, again, take my water spritzer or my water spray bottle, and I want to spray that again to start spreading out that color. And you can hopefully see, the more water that I spray on it, the more those colors spread out and blend together. Now the cool thing about this technique is every single time that you do this, your pattern or your design with these colors is going to come out totally different, because you just never know where that color is going to go. So I'm going to take a paper towel and just kind of lightly pick up some of that excess water that's on there. and that'll kind of help it dry a little faster. Now you can see this one, it has a very light design to it. Some of the other ones that I'm going to show you have a much darker design, and I kind of like them all. They all kind of come out different and give you different looks, and so I think I'm going to leave this one lighter. On one of the samples that I showed you at the beginning, and I'll show you again here in a minute, it has a much darker, much more vibrant color to it, and I kind of like both of the intensities, I guess you could say. Give that just a second. And then I want to try something with this one that I did not do on the first one, and I'll show you the difference at the end. Is I want to take my little spritzing tool here, and I'm going to use the other one. What I put in it is 70% rubbing alcohol, and I put a little bit of our champagne shimmer paint in there, and I don't know if you guys can see that or not. It's really hard to see the shimmer in there, but I want to take that and I'm going to spritz this with my shimmer paint just because I want to see how it ends up turning out. And what it will do is it will kind of also help those colors mix together a little bit more. So we're going to let that sit there for a few minutes and dry. In the meantime, I'm going to take this box out of here and let this dry, and then we're going to get started on the actual card itself. Sorry for the camera movement there. Alright, so I'll bring our sample back in real quick, and this is with the card that I'm going to put together with you. And I've done a lot of the die cutting and stamping ahead of time so that we save on a little bit of the time. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to do all of my stamping. So I'm going to stamp all of the stuff on here and then all of my parts and pieces. So in order to do that, I'm going to bring in my scrap of Whisper White cardstock. I'm also going to bring in the 3 stamps that we are using from that stamp set. I think these tend to get overlooked a little bit because they do kind of look more like brush strokes. There's not a lot of coloring involved in them, and I think sometimes people just lean more towards some of the other images in that set. But I thought I would showcase this because I had that watercolor background and I really liked the way that it turned out. So what I'm going to do is just take my Mango Melody, and I'm going to stamp this flower twice. And then I want to show you what I did with my blender pen. So I took my blender pen and I colored over this image that I just stamped. And the whole idea behind this is I'm going to pull out some of that color into the white space, but I'm going to create more of a watercolor look with it. You can see, hopefully, that as I'm coloring over this, it's pulling that Mango Melody into the center and almost giving it kind of a peachy yellow center to it. And it just kind of softens that flower a little bit. And I'm not being too particular because 1, we're going to punch this out, but 2, when you watercolor, there are no lines usually. So you kind of go, that water kind of just goes where it wants to go. Since we're not actually using water, you kind of want to go outside of the lines of that stamp just a little bit. And hopefully so you can see that yellow pulled right into the center of those flowers. The other thing I'm going to stamp while we're on this piece is I'm going to take my early Espresso ink pad and I'm going to stamp that little sprig of berries. And I really liked the look that I got when I stamped it multiple times. So I'm going to stamp it once, but then I wanted to kind of have more of a bunch of berries, so I stamped it a second time. And that kind of gave me that little bunch that I had on the card. Now, I did the same thing with my blender pen that I did with the flowers, only I went over these little berries and the little stems to kind of soften them and give them a little bit more of a watercolor look. And that kind of tied those little berries in with my project just a little bit better. Okay, to do my leaf, what I want to do with that is bring in my Whisper White circle. And I'm going to use Garden Green. Because even though I used Granny Apple Green as one of the colors, when it blends with some of the other colors, it kind of tends to darken a little bit. So I'm going to use Garden Green. And I'm going to stamp my leaves off to the side over here. And again, I'm going to go back with my blender pen real quick and just kind of color over those and pull that color out, and you can see it instantly just starts to soften and starts to look more watercolored. All right, so the next step that I would do, which I have already done off camera so that one, I didn't have to emboss, but two, it saved us on time, is I have pre-stamped and embossed my sentiment on here with gold embossing powder, so you can see that shine right there. Which I really liked that when I put the whole card together, I had that little extra accent that pulled in with the gold that's in that little gold strip in the leaves that I have on the card itself. So from there, what I did is, sorry, I forgot to grab my punches. So I'm going to be using this leaf punch right here, which has punches out the 3 little leaves. There we go. And I'm going to punch this little set of leaves out of old olive cardstock and also out of the gold foil paper. So bring that in. And that's going to give us the extra little leaves that are in behind the sentiment. And then I'm going to be using this punch right here, which is going to punch out perfectly the flowers that we punched here. Now, in order to use Stampin' Up's punches, you turn your punch upside down and you line your image up with it. And if I had paid more attention to which way I was stamping, it'd be a little bit easier to do this. So there's the first one. Now, because I stamped it the wrong direction, I'm going to have to cut that off in order to punch out this next set of flowers. And this little set of berries I had to freehand cut, or fussy cut, so I went ahead and did that ahead of time also. Alright, so those are all of our parts and pieces, and we are ready to assemble the card. So I'm going to bring in the early espresso piece and the piece that I had watercolored from before. And I want to show you guys, before we move on, the differences between the projects, or the 2 or 3 cards that I've done so far and the pieces that I've done, because I want you to see the difference in how much variation there is. Now, these 2 pieces came from the same watercolor background, and this piece came from another one that I had made, and you can see a huge difference in how much color this one has, intensity of color, compared to these, which are a little bit softer in color. I also have a piece here that I did, and I'm going to show you the sample for it later on, but you can see it's much more muddled or color flecked all over. So when I first put the melon mambo down, it went all over my cardstock, and so you can see those little flecks all over the place. But that's, again, the cool part of this technique, where every time that you do it, it comes out a little bit differently. Alright, so the one that we just did is not completely dry, but I wanted to bring it in and show you this one again as well. This one turned out a little bit more like these, but it has a little bit more flecks of color throughout it, and you can see it's not quite as intense as that other one that I did before this. But I'm really hoping what you can see in this one is I did that extra shimmer on there, and so it just gives it a different look by adding that shimmer on there. And I think I'll use this for another project that I have in mind. But that's just to give you a couple different ideas of what you can do with it. So let's put this together really quick. And I'm just going to take my Tombow my liquid multi-purpose glue, because I really think that this helps hold this watercolor paper down. Sometimes it tends to warp, as you can see, it's not exactly flat. I think it tends to hold that down really well when you're adhering it to your projects. All right. So I'm going to adhere that over to this side, leaving a little bit of a border all the way around. And then I like to turn mine over and really smooth it out, especially with that Tombow glue. It tends to adhere when you hold it down a little bit longer. And then my gold strip, I'm just going to take a little bit of my liquid adhesive here, and I'm going to go right down the side as if it'll come out. There we go. And that way I can take that gold piece and I can butt it right up to there, or layer it over the top, or however it fits. This one's getting layered over the top. So my piece may be a little closer to 3/8 of an inch and not 1/4 of an inch, because I probably wasn't paying attention when I cut it. But we'll make it work. All right, now I have that piece ready to go. I'm going to bring in the Poppy Parade, and I'm going to go ahead and fold that on my score line. Seems to be a little off. I don't know what it is with me today. Apparently I'm a little off. And we're going to adhere this piece onto the card front. And I think my glue is running out. So I'm going to use my snail adhesive, which is also Tombow adhesive because I ran out of snail. Alright, so I'm going to adhere that to the front of the card as well. Just like that. And one thing you want to be careful of with these sprinkles is they will turn your hands colors, especially when there's as much on here as this one is, or when you're picking the pieces up and they're wet, they will get all over. So you might want to wear gloves. I normally do when I'm making lots of different pieces and playing with them, making lots of different cards and whatnot. I'll put gloves on. So now I'm going to adhere my sentiment onto the Early Espresso scallop circle that I die cut prior to this. And then from there we're going to use Stampin' Dimensionals, whoops, as they jump out of my holder. We're going to use Stampin' Dimensionals to adhere almost all of the other pieces together. So I'm going to put quite a few of those on the back of my circle here because I don't like them to get all saggy. Sorry, I bumped the camera. And the first thing that I'm going to adhere is this circle piece. I'm just going to put that right there on the front of my card, just like that. Now, adhering the other pieces, you can do that with just about any adhesive that you want. I like to use that liquid Tombow glue, except for the fact that it's not cooperating right now. So I'm going to use glue dots to put the rest of those pieces on. The only thing I am going to do is I'm going to take my two flowers here and I'm going to put a glue dot or a dimensional in the center of this one. And then I want to layer this one on top of it. So I'm going to turn it until I like the way that it looks so that I have that multi-dimension right there. And then I'm going to put a dimensional on the back of that as well. And that's going to go right up here where my leaf is at, and we're going to adhere that down like that. And this is where my glue dots are going to come in. I'm going to use my glue dots to put these little leaf stems on there. And I'm going to do this old olive one first. So I'm just going to tuck this back in behind my flower. And then I'm going to come in with the gold one and I'm going to tuck that in right behind there as well. And I'm going to do the same thing with my little berries. Only I really want to make sure that my berries stick out a little bit further towards the center of, maybe, have glue dots stuck to things I don't want them stuck to. Alright, I want to make sure that this is tucked behind my sentiment and sticking out into this area just so that they pop out a little bit more. And the only other thing that I did, because I like this card as is, but I really thought that it needed something in the center of that flower. So I took one of our gold faceted gems. I took one of the smaller ones on this side, and I'm just going to put that right in the middle of that flower. And that will finish off of our card. Now, I forgot to cut the inside piece for this one, but I'll show you what I did to finish off the inside of this card. Is I took that same flower and leaves and I stamped those several times on here, and then I also took my blender pen and I went back in and I watercolored each one of those so that it had that softer look to it. So that is the inside of my card, and that finishes up our project for today. But I want to bring in one more card that I made with one of these backgrounds and show you what I did, because it turned out really pretty. So I ended up taking this panel, and the whole watercolor panel itself was just too much. So I die cut a circle out of my layers here. So this would be the Whisper White and the Granny Apple Green. And I die cut my circle out of the center of there. And then I die cut a circle out of my watercolor background. And I inset that into here after I had popped these up with dimensionals. And then for my leaves, I just used regular classic ink pads, and I inked up the background leaf, which is a solid image. I inked it up, and then I just took my little spray bottle here and I spritzed it real lightly before I stamped it onto watercolor paper, and that helped me get that watercolor look to them where you have the lights and the darks. And I did that with each one of these leaves that has that solid image. And then I went back and I embossed over the top of the big ones that gold outline design. You can really see it on this one. I embossed that so that I would pull out that gold accents, and I added some gold leaves to it. But I think it turned out really pretty, and you can see that you can use these in larger pieces or you can use them in much smaller pieces and still get really cool effects and really pretty designs. So thank you for watching my video today. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I will see you again soon. If you like any of the products and decide you want to purchase them, you're more than welcome to visit my website here, which is creationcorner.stampinup.net. And if you really liked my video, please hit the like and share button. And I hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you.